Hello people! After 3 long weeks of painting almost every day, I finally finished the most challenging piece I've ever worked on. It's a 3-foot by 4-foot acrylic painting called Sanctuary, and it took me around 91 hours total. From start to finish, this painting had quite the evolution. I titled this piece Sanctuary because I think it evokes a sense of comfort, a safe space, an oasis amidst the darkness. A little while ago, I had a period of time where my mental health was, not super cool beans. I just felt like there was this cloud of despair weighing me down, and it made everything seem barren and meaningless, and I was just so sad for no reason. This kind of thing happens to me once in a while, but eventually it always passes. And I think that for me, actively choosing to retain hope and believing it'll pass helps make it a reality. Since a lot of my paintings are darker in theme, I wanted to switch it up a little. So the general sentiment of hope and optimism was kind of marinating in my head for a while, but it didn't really have much direction. But one night when I was trying to fall asleep, an image popped into my head. So I got out my phone and I jotted down a very ugly, rough sketch with my finger in my notes app. After that, I decided on the general elements that I wanted to include, like the koi fish, the lotus, the lily pads, and then I found some references on Pinterest just to use for general guidance. For the face and the hands, I used myself. I just set up my camera on my tripod, arranged my softbox lights for lighting, and posed the way that I envisioned for my painting. After compiling my references, I drew a more fleshed out sketch in my sketchbook, and I used a purple Prismacolor color erase pencil. Next, I transferred my sketch to canvas. I always freehand it, and I'm not too concerned about making it exact since I can always adjust as I paint. I sketched the center part in pencil because I wanted to be more precise, and then I used paint to roughly map out the general direction of the swirls. I will not lie, it was pretty hard to stay motivated throughout the process of creating this piece, especially because at every stage I was like, this shit is so ugly, it is funny. And I felt like every time I tried to fix something, it just got progressively worse. I think most of the frustration came from 1, the size, because she's kind of thick, 2, the complexity of all the different elements, and 3, not having a super clear vision of the final product. There was a lot more trial and error involved than usual, and I had to do a lot of painting over and redoing entire areas, which isn't something I usually do. But I pushed myself not to give up, partially because sunk cost fallacy, like I already invested so much time and labor and paint and suffering, so I might as well keep going and suffer more. But also, putting into practice the theme of this piece, I kept believing, or trying to believe, that I had the power to fix it and somehow make it better. I'm still not in love with the final result, but I do think it did improve significantly from the beginning stages. First things first is the underpainting. I always start with a watered down layer of solid color because it helps me set the color scheme and better visualize the elements. I wanted to make the colors extra saturated to create a somewhat ethereal air and to contrast with the dullness of the monochromatic background. Also, part of why I find it so helpful might be more psychological, because for me, the white canvas is the most intimidating part, so just putting down a layer of color makes the whole thing seem a lot more approachable. Also, yes, I am painting in my bathrobe, because it's never not bathrobe season. I'm starting off with rendering the swirls, which took me an entire week to do. Oh my lord, they killed me. As you might already know, these wispy swirl things recur a lot in my art. I developed this abstract style pretty gradually over a few years, and I found it to be an effective vehicle for conveying emotion and mood and movement. It kind of feels like a visual manifestation of my stream of consciousness. I also really like the balance I find between spontaneity and control, and how it introduces a sort of surrealist backdrop that's open for interpretation. I usually map out the general shape beforehand, but mostly I just make it up as I go based on what looks right to me. It's almost like a puzzle figuring out how I can connect different lines or regions in a way that makes sense but still pushes the boundaries of imagination. A lot of the process involves me backing up and just sitting on my ass and staring, trying to figure out what to do next. These swirls in the back are a lot more roughly rendered to create the illusion of distance. Or at least I tried. To get these gray tones, I'm mixing cadmium red with phthalo green for a blackish base, and then adding white based on the value I want. Mixing my own grays instead of using like black from the tube allows me to get some variation in hue, since I can add more red to get a warmer gray or more green to make it cooler. So even though it's generally monochromatic, I think varying the hue here and there helps prevent it from being too flat. I alternate between darks, midtones, and highlights, and gradually render the strokes as I layer up by decreasing the size of my brush. At the very beginning of quarantine, like spring and summer of 2020, I was on like a painting bender. I was painting nonstop, 10-12 hours a day, and I enjoyed every second of it. Like, it was genuinely so fun for me. I think it's because at school I was grinding so hard academically, and I didn't realize how burnt out I was until a mother freaking global pandemic literally forced me to calm down. But so pre-panty, I basically never had time to paint, and I didn't really prioritize art at all. And then suddenly I had all this free time and I didn't know what to do with myself, so I painted. In 2019, I made 15 total paintings, and in 2020, I made 74. Anyway, I was on like a painting high, and I thought it would last forever. To be fair, it did last multiple months, which is pretty impressive, but inevitably, I started to burn out. Since then, I haven't been able to keep pace in terms of motivation to create, enjoyment of the process, and actual speed of painting. I used to be able to churn out a new painting like every 2 or 3 days. Okay, they were smaller and less complex, but I definitely did work a lot faster. I've kind of been beating myself up about it, especially because as someone deliberately trying to overcome perfectionism and stop being so excessively detail-oriented, slowing down kind of feels like I'm regressing or relapsing. Or maybe this is just capitalist sheep brain telling me you must be productive or else you have no value, blah blah blah, asset allocation, blah blah blah, quantitative easing, or whatever the finance bros say these days. Maybe I just have to accept that early quarantine was my peak and it's not gonna come back, and that was the anomaly, not now. I guess that would mean now I just have to learn to embrace a new equilibrium. Now for the hands. They're supposed to be like parting the darkness or whatever to represent a sense of autonomy. Like, you don't have to wait for others to save you. You can save yourself. You can find solace in healing from within. You can also save 15% or more on car insurance when you switch to Geico. I realized that I made the hand too dark and it was like blending into the background, so I pretty much had to paint over all the work I just did, which was very unfortunate. I learned my lesson from the other hand, so I started off with a much lighter base so I wouldn't have to redo the whole thing. The water was probably one of the hardest parts for me to paint. I just could not get that shit right. I think I painted over it 5 times, which was such a pain in the ass because every time I had to do it, I had to paint around every single frickin' lily pad and fish, and I had to do multiple layers to make it opaque, and I had to try to mix the same color over and over again, and then the color kept shifting after it dried, and it was just the worst. Now for the face. I wanted the expression to convey a sense of peace and tranquility. For the skin, I generally build up in layers by starting with the darker areas, filling in with midtones, then adding highlights. And I transition from a bigger brush to a smaller brush as I work up. I'm mixing in blues for cooler toned areas and magentas, yellows, and oranges for warmer toned areas. It's technically me, like I use myself as a reference, but it's not supposed to be me specifically. I used to avoid using faces in my art when I wasn't trying to depict a specific person because I was like, how can I pick a face to represent the default or universal face? So when I was younger, it used to be white people. I would just draw like random ass like blonde haired blue eyed girls and be like, this is art. This is the prototypical human being that represents all of humanity. Now I'm like, okay, the one person I can choose that makes somewhat sense that isn't like discriminatory is myself, even though I hate painting myself because it makes me so uncomfy and I hate looking at myself. But yeah, that's my rationale. This lily pad is cancelled. I had a lot of trouble making the head look like it was underwater, so I tried a bunch of different things, and unfortunately, none of them looked right. Eventually, I ended up painting over most of the neck area, which was kind of sad because rip, many hours of work, but at least you can still see it a little bit peeking through. I was struggling to find a color that made the water look kind of magical and surreal, but still somewhat plausible. It initially looked like pool water, which was a no from me. I decided it was way too saturated, so I tried to dull it down a little. A good tip for making colors more dull is to add the complementary color, so I added some orange to make the blue less vibrant. I initially painted these ripples around the face and immediately regretted it, so I ended up painting over them later. I started listening to audiobooks again recently, now that I actually have time to finish them before my loan expires. I use the Libby app, highly recommend. Because this painting took so damn long, I made it through 10 books: The House of the Spirits, 100 Years of Solitude, Slaughterhouse-Five, The Joy Luck Club, Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, Little Women, Frankenstein, Catch-22, and Half of the Yellow Sun. I would highly recommend audiobooking for people who want to read but are intimidated by reading, or for people who like multitasking. I used to be such a bookworm. Like in elementary school, I would read all the time, and then school happened to me, so I just stopped. So now I'm sorta trying to play catch up with books I probably should have read by now. So I don't know how much of this is from pleasure or just dummy productivity brain telling me I should be a well-read person. But either way, I'm still enjoying it. The perspective was another thing I struggled quite a bit with. I realized multiple separate times that the perspectives of some of the elements just did not make visual sense. Like I just forgot to think about them and like defaulted to like a straight on perspective, which was just not consistent with the entire rest of the painting. Goddamn, too much for my pea brain to handle. So here I had to basically redo all the lily pads, which made me want to pass away. I'm painting over the ripples because I did not like them. Here I'm adding some yellows to the face, mostly Naples yellow for the highlights and oxide yellow for the darker areas. I used yellow pretty heavily in my color palette to try to evoke a sense of warmth and life and comfort. In a lot of Eastern cultures, the lotus symbolizes rebirth and resilience because it takes root in the nasty mud before it blooms. So I was like, oh, a pretty flower emerging from the darkness. How fitting. I've been incorporating more Eastern symbolism in my art lately because I'm trying to experiment with integrating different aspects of my identity in the way I express myself. I feel pretty distanced from my Chinese identity, but maybe I can kind of find a way to reclaim or reconnect to it through artistic expression. Koi fish are supposedly able to swim against currents, so they represent strength and perseverance and overcoming obstacles. There's this Chinese fable where they swim against waterfalls and up a mountain and turn into dragons or some shit. Imagine having that kind of stamina. Guess these fish were doing their Chloe ting. Here I am painting over the water again because it still looked like full water. And then it dried, and I was like, oh no, that is way too dark. So I painted over it yet again. I wasn't really sure what to do with the face part, because it was kind of just floating there. So I tried to make like a glow around it, which I think also helped anchor the face as the focal point in the composition. At the very end, I decided to add in these floating light orb things because I felt like something was missing, and I think they tied everything together. They provided more interaction between the foreground and background, and also made the glow around the face seem less out of place. First, I used my handy dandy Crayola chalk to figure out the placement. Then I took a brush that was kind of beat up and just swirled the paint outward from the center in circular motions. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a beautiful, amazing, incredible, wonderful day.